Thank you guys so much for joining us tonight. This is session 4, if you can believe it. I see Shamika, I know Jody is joining us again for the 4th session. Thank you guys so much for joining us in all of these. This session tonight is going to be on what my parents did right when I was a teen. We have a panel discussion including tips on dating for teens. And so I'm going to ask Michelle to introduce our 5 panelists that have joined us this evening. If any questions should come up, please feel free to drop them into the chat. I'll be communicating with Michelle and we'll pass those questions on to her. If for any reason we're not able to get to every question, we will make sure that those questions get addressed after the fact. I will also be putting in Michelle's email address so that everyone has that for future reference. If you have any questions, please feel free to drop me a note and I'll answer those. I apologize, I'm keeping my computer camera off. It's helping to keep my Wi-Fi that has been sorely used and abused these past couple of weeks as healthy as possible. So without further ado, thank you so much for joining us, and Michelle, take it away.
Oh, well, welcome everyone. I just want to say Explicit Movement is so happy that you're here joining us tonight. For those of you that are newcomers to Explicit Movement event here, I just want to say a couple sentences to just describe where our heart is. We know that many parents struggle with talking with their teenagers about sex and sexuality topics, and so we want to equip you with faith-based, relevant resources so you can have those conversations with confidence. And we know that when you are empowered, you can help young people navigate and avoid damaging experiences and instead really help prepare them for healthy, thriving relationships, relationships in the future, in God's timing and design. So that's mainly our heart, and we're so glad to have you. And I'm really excited tonight because I want to introduce you to some of our amazing core team members who pretty much most of them have been with Explicit from the very beginning, and so you're in for a big treat tonight. I want to introduce actually Pastor Marion and Karis Logan, can wave, Pastor Mark Palumpo, we have Micah Yamada and Pastor Josh Cole. I just love them so much, and I'm really excited to have them share. So we're gonna just jump right in, and I wanna just ask the first question, because I'm eager to know too, like, what were some of the things that your parents did when you were a teenager that helped to build that heart connection with you? Because as we know, as in earlier sessions, we talked about how important that is. So just share. Let's have a time of sharing. Logan, Marion, and Karis, you want to go first?
Sure. Yeah. Well, my upbringing is kind of an interesting. I was born in I would say it's kind of like a Christian alcoholic home. So I had an interesting dynamic. One is my mom. She loved the Lord. She's doing everything that she can to raise us in the right environment. And then on the other hand, I dealt with a father who was alcoholic, And so it was kind of a juxtaposition of these two things that were kind of coexisting. And so on one hand, when we talk about sharing heart, we're going to hear some of the other guys sharing a bit. I didn't have that with my father. I didn't have like a big connection up until the day he passed away. The man, in a lot of ways, is a mystery to me, and so, with that said, I had a very good relationship with my mom, and it's not that my dad, we had a terrible one, but with my mom, there was just something, a special connection that we had, and from a young age, she would speak openly with us, and she would talk with me personally. I remember one time when I was a teenager, early teen, I think I was 12, 13 years old, and I'm hanging out with my buddy, and we stayed out all night. And I told my mom I was going to be at his house, and then he and I went, and then we went somewhere else. We were hanging out with this other group of kids. And my mom got wind of it. And I'm like, oh no, I'm in big trouble now. And I remember that one time I'm driving, I'm in the car with her, and she just looked at me, and she wasn't angry. She didn't bring down the hammer. She looked at me and she said, son, do you know what trust is? I was like, no. And she said, well, trust is something that I have for you, and it takes a long time to earn, and you can lose it with one bad decision. It doesn't mean I don't love you. It doesn't mean that I don't want you to be my son. It simply means that I won't trust you. And she looked at me and just point blank said, do you want me to be able to trust you? And it was like, I felt like I had a grown man thought at that time. I'm like, man, would I want to live my life with my mom not being able to trust me? And that's something that stuck with me. You know, I think about that. And I imagine I'll have that same discussion with my kids, you know? And so, yeah, that's just like that's one thing that just stands out in my mind.
Wow, that sounds like a really great moment. I mean, for you to remember that, even to this day.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
That's great, Maureen. Thank you. Thank you. Karis, you were going to say something? Share.
Yeah, well, a lot of you know my dad is Pastor Cal Chinen and my mom is Joy. And so we grew up actually in this very house that we now live. And so we live in the parsonage, so the house right there on the church campus. And so back then, because our church came out of a congregational kind of, what do you call it? Denomination, I guess. Well, we're still in the same denomination, but it was very congregational. So there was a lot of pressure on the senior pastor to do everything. I mean, the board actually had expectations that he was supposed to do, like, I don't even remember, it was like 300 plus house visits a year, you know? And so there was a lot of pressure on him. But I think he had made a decision when we were young to say that he was never gonna put the ministry before his family, and especially the ministry was not gonna come before his wife. And I guess that kind of goes into the next topic, but that was something that when we got married, my parents had told us that the most challenging times in their marriage was when dad had put the church before my mom, and when my mom had put the kids before my dad. And so that's kind of been a part of our marriage, where we really try to keep everything in the right order of priority. But, you know, so we did a lot. So because of that, then he made sure that we had dinners together almost every night that we could. You know, family nights, we would do game nights when we were kids. We just kind of make up our own games and things like that. But then as we got older and then we had moved to Kaneohe, I was in 8th grade. And so I was finishing out at Moana Loa, back then intermediate, now Moana Loa Middle School. And so my dad would drive me into school every morning. And, you know, I mean, 8th grade girl, just super hormonal and insecure and awkward and all of that. And I remember, like, my dad would never, like, turn on the radio. And I'd be like, like, why can't we just, like, listen to the radio? Like, everybody else listens to the radio, you know? And he would insist on not having the radio on, and we would talk. And it was every morning and in the afternoon going home. And I mean, you know, ladies, you could probably remember, you know, when you're just at that age, it's like, nothing in you wants to, but at the same time, I think it was those moments of that heart-to-heart connection where my dad continued to pursue me, even in these moments where I was just like, oh, you know, rolling my eyes and not, you know, and eventually it just became, he became that safe place for me, where I went through, I mean, I look back now, it was probably one of the hardest times of my life where, you know, I had a whole group of friends and they all decided we're going to do naughty things, and Karis is a Christian, so she's not going to want to do it. And all my friends turned on me. And it was my parents that I ran to. And I really believe that if I hadn't had those heart-to-heart connections with my dad, you know, and with my mom too, I think that really did create I knew that they were going to be safe because of that.
Wow, thank you for sharing. That's something so practical. We're in the car almost every day. Well, not lately, but we will be back in the car again. So those are really, that's really practical, and we can take advantage of those times. Pastor Josh, you want to share something from your heart about how your parents connected with you?
Well, I think that, well, hi everyone. My name is Pastor Josh. I am the firstborn son of three. Oldest sister is 2 years older than me, and then my younger brother is 3 years younger than me. So, I mean, we grew up in church, going to church all the time. I'm kind of like Karis too, and pastor's kids. I think one of the things that, I mean, I just want to make sure I keep it concise about the connection. Yeah, life was busy with ministry. But, you know, most of the time, I think people always ask like what it's like. My parents just made it like this is life. It wasn't like anything different. And so in a sense, the church became the playground. There was secret tunnels in the church, and we found them all. And even though, like, I know we should probably never do this, but we had dibs on the communion bread and the grape juice. And so, like, I don't know. And I think there was a lot of grace from my parents knowing that we were constantly in the church. They understood that it wasn't like normal. But I think in the heart-to-heart connection, so as a child, it was just basically like, oh, I know nothing, you know, different until the teenage years rolled around. And then all of a sudden, the teenage friends start telling me that I'm missing out on a bunch of things. And I think that's where, you know, as a teenager, you're just realizing, like, wait, what am I missing out on? Like, what am I missing out? And then as a teenager, you're trying to like figure out acceptance and all those type of things. And that's where kind of like in the connection, that area, it was starting to morph, because you're like you're being told that you're missing out on something. And then you kind of like looking at your life and you're like, well, I don't know about this ministry thing. And, you know, maybe I can't go watch these type of movies or hang out with these type of friends and stuff like that. But I think one of the things that as we were in our adolescence, in our teenage years, there was never their expectations that were forced on us to do ministry or to be a certain way. It was something that I guess for us that we had to sift through and figure out, because they never said that I expect you to be this way, or to be perfect, or to be like the pastor's kid because you're ruining our reputation. And I just realized maybe like even whether I thought maybe that was just specific for ministry, but I realized that across the board in any career, parents have expectations for their kids to keep their image up and make sure that you're not making me look bad as a parent or making me look bad in my career. And I guess for pastors, this is a huge thing. But I think my parents constantly reminded, hey, look, you make your own choices. We've raised you well, especially in the teenage years. And they were pretty strict with us. They laid out some really strong boundaries. But in the end game, I think one of the biggest lessons that I learned is that, hey, you know, they taught us what we need to learn. And in the end, you stand before the Lord, and that's you and him. And I can't stand for you. I think this is where you have to discover your relationship with God. And that's kind of where my journey, like my personal journey with God began, because of the freedom that I was released to make decisions. I didn't always make right decisions. My siblings, we didn't all make right decisions. But I think what was important was we knew that my parents loved us no matter what. And I'll tell you probably where I had the biggest heart connection was when I grew up in college and was faced with something that maybe in the maturing process, it was something hard, leadership role. It was overwhelming. I remember, and I know this is a high school discussion, but even in those type of decisions, many times, like maybe they don't want to, as teenagers, they don't want to share, the likes and dislikes, but whenever it's hard moments, that's where my parents came in. And it was kind of like when I felt the pressure, or I felt like I couldn't do something, I felt like I had gone in over my head. That's where those small like encouragements, and even when they leaned in, no matter if they were busy or not, they stopped what they do to lean in and listen to what's happening. That's where I remember that I had some really meaningful conversations. I'll be a little bit more specific. And for me, I've always seen my dad as a tower of strength. If you know Pastor Clayton Cole, he's a lead pastor of a multi-site church, and it just seems like, and he's been like a rock for me, consistent in decision making. When everyone's freaking out, he's like rock steady, and he's like faith driven and all that kind of stuff. But one thing I really appreciated when it came to a shaking moment in my life, he was very vulnerable with me. He shared with me I guess there was levels, and he was waiting for the right time for a certain conversation to present itself. And I just remember I was kind of shaken, and I didn't think that anyone kind of understood, not even my friends, because it had to do with something that was more heavier than I could bear. But at that moment, he recognized that moment, and he was vulnerable with me. And that was it was like surprising, because maybe my dad is not as much of a talker like I am. And I guess I get that from my mom. She's super like exuberant and extroverted. My dad is very introverted, and he's fine just staying home and not talking. He says preaching is not even his forte. He doesn't even, I know he's a senior pastor, but he'd be okay if he didn't have to preach. And I'm like, wow. And but in that moment, his words came heavy. And I think that I know that we should always kind of like, talk, but there are moments where in your vulnerability, those words come in heavy. And then that's where either your teenager or your child will start to tune in when they're going through a hard time. So I just remember that was a very important conversation I had. He waded in, and I think that, more than ever, like I've seen us grow from that moment. I realized I could be vulnerable with him. From that moment, he was vulnerable with me to share something exclusive that he doesn't share with his pastors or share with his leaders, but just me as a kid, right? Just me as his son. And I think that's kind of like where I had that connection with him.
That's powerful. I know we talked earlier in another session about the power of vulnerability, and picking those moments, like, you led by the Lord to bare your heart and create that safe place and know a little of their story. So that's great. Thanks, Pastor Josh. And Pastor Mark, do you have anything to add? Like how was it in your home?
Yeah. Hey, first of all, is my microphone working? Can you guys hear me? Oh, okay. Awesome. Elisa, not so much. Oh, it is? Okay, great. Yeah. So I think a big misconception is that because I don't have a huge quantity of time, I may not be able to establish a heart-to-heart with my kids. But I don't think any of us has a huge quantity of time, right? I don't think all of us have, well, maybe in this season, but typically for me, in our house, I always felt like quality time trumped quantity of time. My dad was in full-time ministry from before I was born. My mom was working long hours as a hairstylist. That's how I'm able to still have haircuts in this season. And so it's been years since she cut my hair, but I think she did an okay job. So my parents were busy with ministry, busy with work, like I'm sure many of us are. And so it was really in those times of transition, like Kara shared, car rides, just making the most of those times, redeeming those transitional times, morning before off to school, right before bed. It's always in the times of transition, which is actually what we find in Deuteronomy 6, where, the Lord tells the people of Israel, impress these things that I'm putting on your heart, impress them on your children as you're walking along the way, as you rise up, as you lay down. So it's like in everyday life, don't just wait for Sunday before you have these spiritual discussions. Have them on the way, have them in the morning, at the breakfast table if you can. And this might be a little old fashioned. I don't know if people still do this anymore, but for us, dinner around the table was where those heart-to-heart connections happen. And I know that's extremely difficult for, people's schedules and stuff. But man, I know that no matter how busy my parents were, they somehow were able to make dinner time around the table a priority. And when we were growing up, this was before cell phones. So we were at a little bit of an advantage. We had the landline, which we couldn't bring to the table. But then eventually when we got to high school, cell phones were a thing, but that was like a cell phone free zone. It was a distraction free zone. I know that might sound antiquated, but, talking about your day, just around the dinner table, opening up, what was the highlight? What was a struggle, and just every time we were able to have those conversations around the table. So I don't think there's really a magic secret or key. It's just redeeming those little moments in everyday life and putting aside distractions for a little while and making a genuine heart-to-heart connection, like Pastor Josh said, by being vulnerable, by hearing them out. And those are my kids. I don't know if you can hear them in the background. So yeah, just redeeming those little moments. And I felt like my parents, as busy as they were able to do that. So.
Thank you so much, Mark. That's something we can all do, and maybe conscious effort on it, So put away the phones and all of that during dinner time and meal time. And even as parents, sometimes, we got to make sure we do that. So that's great. Thank you, Mark. Micah, I'd love for you to share now some of your stories or your thoughts about how you were growing up as a teen and your parents.
Yeah, so like everybody else, I was raised in the church. My dad's been a pastor for as long as I can remember. And one of the things that I really appreciated that they did was my dad, well, it started with my dad. So he's really busy all the time. But he always, when we were little, he always made sure that he would set aside, like, whether it was a breakfast, I think it was a breakfast. He used to take us out. I have two sisters, and he would take each of us out on one day to breakfast, and we would just talk about whatever. It was super casual, and we just get to spend quality time with him. Yeah. And my mom would do that too. But it was like, for me, just to have that one-on-one time with my parents was so I think critical and crucial in building my strength of relationship with them as I grew up, because that gave me the confidence to know that, like, I could run to them for whatever. And so, they started doing that when I was really young. And then, as you go through the teenage years and whatnot, but even in like the toughest seasons of my life, because I knew that they were always willing to listen to me and to hear my heart, that I could run to them for anything. So that was one of the main things that I really appreciate about them.
Well, Micah, thank you so much for sharing that. I know we talked earlier about, I would love if you could share that issue that you had, and how your dad, in the issue about pornography, and how your dad, reacted or responded to that. Because, in those moments of confrontation or trying to help, your child or teenager through something that they're going through, a struggle, those are times also, right, to build that heart connection and that safety. So can you share that testimony? I just, such a beautiful testimony.
Yeah. So I don't really honestly remember how old I was. I think I was in high school, and then yeah, I was looking at some bad stuff. And I think it was my mom that caught me, I think, and I don't really remember. I think it was her. But anyway, so she confronted me about it, and she said, "Well, we're going to talk about this. And you're going to talk to your dad about it." And I was like, "Oh, okay." So I was, expecting him to bring down the hammer and just lay it on me, like, "Why, you did this wrong. Like, why did you do that? Yada yada yada." But his response was like, it surprised me because he approached it so calmly, and I remember he kind of just told me like, well, like, hey, like, kind of probe like my feelings, like, why did you do it? What made you feel like you wanted to look at this stuff? And instead it was kind of like he allowed me to kind of sort through my feelings, and I think that really helped instead of just you just slam the door on it and just like, don't do it again. But he elaborated on more like, okay, why is this such a problem? Like, what can it lead to? And knowing that my dad was always looking out for the best for me, that really helped me, I think, see the bigger picture of it. It made me more receptive to like, okay, this isn't good, because it can lead to other things down the road, and worse choices possibly. And so that guidance that he offered me, and the way that he approached it with this really like unconditional love, and just like, it disappointed me, but it doesn't change how I feel about you. It doesn't change how I love you. I still love you the same. And so that was like, wow. So that was really crucial, I think, for me, in terms of like, okay, I made a mistake, and now I see the error of it. And then after that, it was never really an issue for me, because I think when my dad had to offer it, it gave me more foresight into seeing like, okay, if I want to have a good marriage, if I want to approach dating correctly or in a godly way, if I want to be a good husband, a good father one day, then this stuff cannot happen. And so, yeah, it kind of gave me more perspective looking into the future, even though that was, years away. So, yeah.
Well, thank you for sharing that. I think those are just a reminder, to not react, but take that time to, calm yourself down and to be able to connect heart to heart at those moments. Thank you. I want to go on to the next great question, which is, this really can impact us as teenagers too, is how did our parents, model a good marriage? Something that we would want, hopefully someday in the future. And so I thought that would be helpful to know, because for those of us who are married, we can get some encouragements of what really impacted our panelists. So let's go back to the Logans again. What were some of the things that your parents did that modeled a good marriage?
Well, I'll go first. I already kind of shared about my parents, but I think it was, my dad always talked about how beautiful my mom was to us, to the kids. They would openly show affection and, kiss each other. And I think, and it went back to them putting God first, and then putting their marriage right after that, if not at the same, or not at the same, but, we came after their marriage. And so I think with that, it brought security. And I think we never had to worry about how mom and dad were, and if they were going to stay together or not. And we, it really did, it brought that security. And so, yeah, that's what it is for me.
That's great. Marion, do you have anything to add?
I mean, my parents' marriage wasn't the healthiest, they stayed together. And I remember talking with a friend of mine, I was talking about struggles and things that they were going through. And he just looked at me point blank one day, and he's like, well, at least you have a dad at home, And so it really, you know, it did take me, I was taken aback when he said that. And so one of the things that I realized is that I was fortunate. Even though my dad had his issues with alcohol, he was always faithful to my mom. And that's one of the things that my mom talks about to me, that she's talked about to me since I was a teenager, was that, you know, she's had good friends that they've gone through some painful things, and she just was always thankful that he was faithful to her. And so you know, that was a part of it. And one of the things is my dad was a man of his word. And, you know, like I said, I didn't grow up in a perfect home by any means. There was a lot of dysfunction. You know, if you have an alcoholic in the home, the best that it can be is you're just it's surviving. That's the best situation it can be. But I think for what we had and for who my dad was and who my mom was walking with the Lord, that God was faithful in my family. So yeah, I mean, that's.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. Faithfulness is important. That's good.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Josh, Pastor Josh, what about you? What are some things about your parents' marriage that you remember that, you know, stood out to you, that blessed you, that gave you good vision?
Yeah. Man, you know, my parents, like it's weird because it's like they were so like involved together in ministry. Like if you knew my parents, like it was the typical Pentecostal couple. You got literally my mother playing the piano and leading the worship band and like the whole worship ministry, and then my dad doing the preaching. So I mean, it was so typical. But one of the things you don't, I mean, that's what they did. They served together. They did ministry together. But what people, I guess, don't see is how much fun they have at home. And I guess what we saw most of that all the time. And one of the things that in their marriage, probably where I saw my dad's strength come in is when my mom she's been battling physical like sicknesses all her life. Like she's pretty much blind. She like lost one eye and pretty much only has probably about half her other eye. At one point she was completely blind. And my dad, I mean, in the middle of going so hard in ministry, in those moments, he would just pull back and just focus on her needs. And that showed me that, I mean, it's hard for my dad. It was difficult for my dad because his personality is so like driven and to go. But I know that there were times when he would just stay back with her, comfort her, take care of her. And thank God that her health is a lot better. And but the care, the type of care that he was willing to give up, even like the ministry, this big ministry, to take care of my mother in her health, and also get all the kids to do all the chores. So I mean, like literally, I mean, we had our involvement in this when when mom was down, we had to do our share and make sure that we help take care of the house and do all the cleaning and all that type of things. And I don't know, that's the type of one of the things too is if they did have problems, I guess to shield us, they didn't have heated fights right in front of us. They definitely took it to a private room or a private place, and they resolved their issues and away from, you know, all of us seeing and hearing. You know, maybe some people are like, well, it's good to see disagreement and stuff, but I think that they understood that maybe as children we didn't understand, so they made sure that they did their I guess clean fighting behind closed doors, and make sure that, you know, even if we did hear something, they would bring us all together and explain and kind of like kind of share like what the disagreement was about and all that kind of thing. So I had definitely learned a lot, and I'm still learning a lot, and I'm definitely still gleaning from all that. I guess being married for 2.5 years, hey, I realized that, you know what, marriage is work, and it's not as easy as it seems. So I'm pulling on a lot of things that even now I'm gleaning from.
Wow, that's great. I love how you said about just really observing the kindness and the servant's heart one to another. And I think you said another thing too is having fun. Like you saw your parents have fun together, laughing and joking around, enjoying each other's relationship. I think because I saw some videos of your mom, and she's so fun and so funny, and I can just imagine the laughter in your home too. You know, and parents can set the tone for that. So I think that's great.
It really is.
Yeah. Yeah, Pastor Mark.
Yeah. I think the thing that I appreciate the most that my parents modeled was just a genuine, intimate relationship with Jesus. You know, it wasn't a weekend thing. It wasn't a Sunday thing. It was a Monday through Saturday, Sunday, every day. And not that they were like holy rollers, you know, like weird at home, but you just knew that when it came to big life decisions, Jesus was the reason, you know, that they were seeking the Holy Spirit, that they were making decisions that in the natural, you know, didn't make sense on paper, but because they felt a leading of the Lord, they stepped out in obedience, and they did things that, you know, looking back, we were like, wow, those, you know, as a kid, you're like, yeah, that was what we did. But looking back, it's like, man, you uprooted your small family, your young family, you moved around the world, and you know, you pursued seminary in another country, and you know, you did this and you did that. You stepped away from a secure job, and you know, you look back and you're like, why did you do all that? You know, that doesn't make any sense. But it was all because of the leading of the Lord. And so to me, that's been probably the biggest thing that I've taken away into my own marriage, is just when it comes to big decisions, when it comes to what's best for my family, putting the voice of the Lord before even what makes sense or what looks right on paper, you know, and just keeping Jesus at the center, and even making difficult decisions that, you know, don't look like logical, so to speak, in the natural, but is what, you know, the Lord is leading you to do. So.
Wow, that's great, Mark. So that's another thing we can pass on or model, right? Is that relationship, that love relationship that we as parents have with the Lord, and sacrifice and walk of faith. So that's great. You know, just before I go to my coach, I will in just a second. Someone had a question about dinner time, because, you know, you mentioned about sharing meals. Someone had a question about how long should a typical dinner be? I know it can vary, right, depending, but just in what would be a general, just all of you, what would be a typical amount of time that you spent with your family at a typical dinner when you're a teen?
Well, I can share first. As a teenager, I think because we had, again, we built upon just years and years of having family dinner. When we got to our high school years, we would sit around the table literally for hours, like 4 hours, 5 hours, and just sit and talk. And we did that up until, you know, I think the first grandchild came. But that was just, and it was for, like, my brothers both got married before me, and both of their spouses, I think my older brother, when he got married, she was kind of in shock with, you know, how we were, to just sit and talk and share. And I mean, it really was a heart to heart. So obviously now that we have we all have kids, it is different, but it still is a special place. So I don't know, I think time wise, it just, you gauge it for the age of your children. We do it with our boys, and our kids are 4 and 6. And so the way that we do it is we play games, or we do like would you rather questions, and we do what did you love and what did you learn today? And just different things like that, just to go around the table and share. And I mean, it doesn't last super long, but at least, you know, they kind of know that that's what happens at the table. We never use it as a time of correction. You know, we don't bring up things that we need to, you know, correct them on. But it is, we make it fun. I mean, our boys are young, so yeah, we do what we can.
Can I add one thing? Is that I don't know, you know, for whoever asked that question, I wouldn't worry about the time. The time's not the issue. It's the connection. That you're working to be deliberate, because if you're working, if you approach it from a time thing, then you're going to be, you're setting a standard for yourself. And, you know, and especially if you're working on the connection, for some people, if you have 10 good minutes and that's the most you've ever connected, I would want you to feel like, man, this was a win. We actually had a conversation. We actually connected, you know? And so if you find yourself connecting, I would gauge it on that. And so if you feel like you should be at a standard, we should be spending an hour at the dinner table, you know, that may be something that the Lord's placed in your mind, but I wouldn't like gauge success on that. Success is we're connecting. Success is, you know, learning things like what Cars was saying. You know, I'm not gonna bring up issues at the dinner table. This is our time together. So
yeah. Oh, I love that, Marianne, because yeah, there's no rule, or, you know, and things can change like today to tomorrow, you know, so that just that having that goal of connection, I think that's well said. You know, we have about 20 more minutes left, and I do want to get, hopefully we'll have some question time at the end, but I did want to get into the dating, because I know that's probably a really good hot topic for us parents. So when you were teenagers, I know that parents have different opinions on that. You know, we have some parents who believe it's okay for their child as a teenager or high schooler to date, whereas some parents prefer to say, you know, let's wait till after you graduate high school. But either way, you know, I think parents still need to talk with their kids about the whys and the whats and the purpose of dating. So that's still a good conversation. So maybe you guys can share just some tips or your experiences and the whys, maybe why behind dating that your parents imparted to you, and that could help the parents, you know, navigate that a little bit. Yeah. So, and Micah, did you have, before we do that though, Micah, I want you to share about, you know, your parents, because your parents were great models of a married couple too, so I don't want to forget that. So please share.
Yes, they were great models. They still are today. I think what I remember from a young age is, and they still do it today, is they have one night always, it's non-negotiable, that they always go out on a date. And I remember as a little kid, like that meant grandma and grandpa would come over and watch us. So I was like, yes, it's awesome. I love it. So I remember me and my sisters were like, Mom, Dad, when are you going to go out on a date? Because it meant that grandma and grandpa were coming over, probably get ice cream or something. And so, you know, but looking at it now, it really shaped my marriage in terms of knowing that my dad always prioritized my mom and their connection over anything. And, you know, they always made sure to connect at the end of the day, whether it was they would sit on the couch and they would tell us as kids, like, okay, we got 30 minutes that Mom and me are going to talk and you can't bother us. So just go play and do whatever. And even when we were older, you know, I always saw them sit down and talk, and just to know that they prioritize that connection over everything else really shaped my marriage. And I glean a lot from it too, because I prioritize that so much in my marriage today. And like my dad He's amazing because, you know, I never heard him speak ill of my mom. He would always, he still does, still holds her hand in public. He kissed my mom in front of us. And honestly, I didn't really think too much about it until now. I have a 5-month-old daughter now, and I always kiss my wife in front of her, and I will always say, "Daddy loves mommy," and her face just like lights up every time I do that, and so it's just so cool to, I think, be on the other side of it and just see I think maybe the comfort that knowing that mom and dad are good, and that mom and dad love each other, and not being afraid to demonstrate that in front of your kids was like, it's huge, and it gave me such a great model to base like how I approach dating and marriage. And so, you know, I try to take as much as I can from them and apply it to my marriage and parenthood now, because, you know, they got years of wisdom. So yeah, if I can jump ahead, I will.
Thank you so much, Micah. And you know, I want to just add on to that for all of us parents, it's never too late to start these things. So even if you feel like, oh, I didn't do that, or I haven't been doing that, it's okay. Like, it's never too late to just start small and take some of these tips as the Lord leads you, and just start, you know, and it's never too late. Before I go on, Micah, I remembered now there was one point I wanted you to just share briefly about regarding your parents. You had said that one thing you wished was that they talk more about sex. To you, I remember that. So can you just say a few comments about that to encourage the parents that, you know, it's a good thing to talk about as an ongoing conversation, you know, as a teenager?
Yeah, sure. So going into, I think for a lot of us, my parents didn't let me date till after I finished high school. We actually kind of like compromised, and they asked me, or they let me, well, she's my wife now, but my girlfriend at the time, they let me ask her out, like, I think a month before I graduated. They kind of just like, okay, you know, they know I've been talking to her for a while. So my parents communicated really well in terms of approaching dating to get married, and to always have that in the forefront of your mind, because if you didn't, there was no sense in doing it. It was pointless. Like, what's even the reason to get so involved in such a heart issue? And so, but one of the things that I wish that they had told me or talked to me a lot more about was the sex aspect of it. And I think, you know, living in such a hypersexualized culture that we do today, it's such a loosely valued thing, I guess you could say. And so, you know, I knew a whole bunch of people that were having sex and all that stuff. And, you know, I always knew, like, okay, I need to save it for marriage, but I never understood why. And I think, and if, you know, whoever's married, you know how incredible it is, like, just straight up, like, it's one of the most amazing things ever. And it is only that amazing in the context of marriage because of the the intimacy that it brings between a husband and a wife, and how valuable it is. And so I think if they talked more about it, and it made me realize, I think, how valuable it is, it would have helped me a lot more along my journey of dating. And, you know, it's by God's grace, because really, like, I think through my relationship with God, I discovered that on my own, and just like, okay, you know, this thing is really important. I don't understand it all right now, but it's very valuable. And at one time, at a point in my life, I will understand it. And so, yeah, so I just encourage all the parents out there to, you know, don't be afraid to talk about it. You want yourself to be the ultimate, like, resource in sex. You don't want your kids to having to go to talk to their friends about it, or you know, somebody else, whoever. You want to be the ultimate guide to it. So yeah, don't be afraid to talk about it. You may not have the right answers. You may not have the perfect story. Like me and my wife, we didn't do everything by the book, but you know, just to be unafraid to be vulnerable with your kids, because you know, if they know that mom and dad have your back, like yeah, there's nothing that is gonna sway them. So I just encourage the parents with that.
Thank you, Micah. Just having those ongoing conversations is so good. So let's just kind of dive in. I know we have just a few minutes. If you guys just each share, I know Micah shared a little on the dating aspect. So maybe everybody can just share a couple minutes worth of 2-3 minutes of just, you know, some of their experiences or encouragements from their parents. So Logan's?
For me, it was connection. My mom was always wanting to know what was going on. And I think wherever, you know, parents, wherever you sit on the side of, you know, I'm going to let my teenager date, I'm not going to let my teenager date. I think if you are going to let them date, your involvement is critical. And I don't believe it's a hands-off thing, you know. And my mom was not hands-off with me and kept the communication open. And so I'd really encourage you, you know, to not just be like, oh, well, they're teenagers and they just have to figure this out. In my experience in ministry, I've never seen a high school relationship go well where it was kind of left up to their responsibility. I haven't seen it yet. Where parents were involved, where communication was happening, where intentions were communicated, under those circumstances, I've seen it. And so that was true in my life as well. And so keeping the communication, the connection open, that's something that I've experienced and something that I've seen and witnessed. So, yeah.
Thank you.
I wanted to just share too, I know we're talking about marriage and everything, but if there is someone that is a single parent here, I want to encourage you that when your children will see that your relationship with God comes first, that's going to give them ultimate security just as much, if not more. And so, you know, I just wanted to encourage those single parents that it's not like you need to be married in order for your children to feel secure. They're going to see your relationship with God and feel the security from that, you know. So even just the visible, like seeing you reading your Bible, things that, you know, we're talking about, like, you know, seeing our parents do physical, you know, affection or public displays of affection. I think you can do the same thing, you know, with the Lord and you worshiping God and reading your Bible and stuff like that. But for me, when we were in elementary school, my older brother, he was just a grade above me, and he's very cool. He's always had girls after him. He's never had to ask a girl on a date. Like all through high school, he never had to ask any girl to any dance or function or prom because he got asked to every single thing. So in 6th grade, you know, they did like student council leadership, something or other, and they did it with other elementary schools. And he came back with a girlfriend. And so, so that sped up that process for my parents. And it was then that my dad would say it was my mom's leadership. And she just said, okay, for all kids, they're all not gonna date until after they graduate from high school. So that was very clear. And that is something, you know, I did youth ministry for 9 years. And I would constantly tell the parents, like, please don't tell your kids you're not allowed to date until you're 30, because that just leaves way too much room for like, well, I don't know if they're serious or not. So I think to give an actual, like, you know, this is the line, like this is when you will be able to date. I think that's very good, and it will help your child. And so for me, I was very thankful that my parents did that, because honestly, it saved me from a lot of horrible decisions that I would have made in high school. And I think what it did, when I look back, it really did, it taught me how to guard my heart, you know. And I was still allowed to go to all the proms and everything else, but my dad did require that every single guy had to ask him for permission to go, and not just ask for permission. They had to give him everything that was going to happen like after the function. So even my senior prom I went with my super good friend. To this day, he's still a good friend of mine. My dad shut him down, told him no, because he didn't have the plan for after prom, you know? So I think it was horrible at the time. I was so embarrassed that these guys had to ask my dad for permission. But I look back now, and it was those kinds of things where he would tell these boys, Karis is very precious to me and to her family. And so you need to know that I am trusting you with her for this night or whatever. And, you know, again, mortified as a teenager, hated it. But I can see how that really did instill value in me. And it taught me like, wow, that this is who I am. And I am precious and I am valuable to God and to these people. So, yeah. And, you know, it's not like I met Marion right after high school, you know, then I went through all the dating, all of that stuff. But I feel like it set a good foundation for knowing how to date and how to guard my heart.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much, Marian Karis. That was awesome. And, you know, we're going to have more talk on this in 2 weeks when Karis's parents will be actually really focusing all on dating in a couple weeks. So you don't want to miss that. We'll get more of a fuller story. Okay, Pastor Josh. Want to add to that? We have a few minutes.
Yeah, I guess just real quickly. I guess one of those, like I said, Pentecostal family. We didn't talk about relationships much. We talked about the Holy Spirit, being filled with Him, and speaking in tongues. So the relationship stuff, it wasn't exactly we didn't really talk about, and that's why I'm a part of Explicit, because I'm trying to like learn, you know. And but I think that you know, with that, you know, don't tell you, like I think Karis like said, you know, don't tell your kids not to date until you're 30, because then they won't take you seriously. I think that led me into a life of secrecy, that put me in a place where I was hiding my relationships, because I didn't know if I was doing something wrong. I felt like I was doing something wrong, but I wasn't. It was just trying to navigate what a dating relationship, or even what do I do with liking a girl. And most times it was like, don't date, you know, it's like, okay. And so I'm kind of, I think that like, you have to understand that even in a strong Christian family, having these conversations don't always take place. And what I'm learning now is something that's helping me form kind of like, you know, even better, stronger ideas of how I can parent. I just want to mention, I am about to have a child in October. Woo, 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 woo. And I don't know if it's going to be a boy or a girl, but I am reading a book. Oh man, I know like people say don't read, like you should read books and all that. Well, I'm reading a lot of books. Like I need something. It's just like I've learned a lot, but I think books are good. I'm reading a book called Strong Fathers, Strong Daughters, and it's by Dr. Meg Meeker. And wow, I think that's probably, it is like hitting me. I don't think I'm gonna have a daughter. I don't know, I might have a daughter, I might have a son. I figured I better prepare for a daughter because that seems like the most difficult one. So, you know, prepare with this book. But, you know, I see like, you know, how a dating life is so important and how I need to be involved and learning from a lot of these incredible pastors and parents. I'm even learning from parents that are in my youth ministry how to better kind of like talk about the conversation in dating. So yes, thanks for all helping me, guys.
Thank you, Pastor Josh. That's great. That's great. Pastor Mark, I would like you to close us out just with your final thoughts on this subject, and then we'll pray, and then we'll release everyone. But I'm just so excited. I'm learning so much too from all of you. Pastor Mark.
Amen. Yeah, I think, you know, just to tie everything we've been talking about together, right? When it comes to relationships, that's when you're going to really be thankful that you had that heart-to-heart connection with your kids, because now you're going to be able to have those difficult conversations and to steer them and to navigate them. And really, when it comes to relationships, especially at the high school age, rules are not going to stop it from happening. No amount of rules are going to keep your kid in line, in order. At that point, it has to be relationship, because no matter how many rules or curfews or boundaries you establish, if that relationship isn't there and if they don't have a strong vision, then they'll find ways around it. And so even if they, stray or veer from the path, if that relationship is there and they know that you're a safe place, they'll come back to you and they'll talk to you. And that's exactly what happened to me. When I was a sophomore in high school, I knew my parents didn't want me dating. I entered into, an undercover relationship, my first relationship as a high schooler in my sophomore year. And because I so valued that connection with my parents, I just couldn't keep it a secret. It was just eating away at me from the inside. And I just so valued that connection with them that it just came. But my mom just had to look at me and she was like, "What's going on?" She just knew just by looking at me. And I told her, and I'll never forget what she said. I thought for sure she would say, "Okay, stop," end it, break it up. But that was sort of when the switch happened, the shift happened that I'll never forget, where she said, "As soon as this relationship gets between you and the Lord, I'm trusting that you will end it." And now I could no longer say, well, my mom's telling me to do it. Now the ball was in my court, and now it was between me and God. And I can tell you, having that responsibility and now my mom's trust, that relationship was over in 2 weeks. Nothing happened. We didn't even kiss, so I just knew I didn't want to compromise my relationship with them or my relationship with the Lord. And so it all comes back to relationship, heart to heart, intimacy, and a strong vision for what they're doing. But so I think everything we've been talking about, it all feeds in together. So that's awesome.
Oh, thank you so much. That was so profound. Pastor Mark, can you just close us in a prayer to bless all these parents that have joined?
Absolutely. Lord, I just thank you so much for this evening. I thank you so much for this time. And I especially want to thank you so much for every mother and father who is here this evening, who is seeking after you, who, Lord, like all of us, Lord, we all want to learn. We all want to grow. This is so much bigger and more challenging than us. And so we desperately need you. Holy Spirit, we need your voice. We need for you to speak to us, and we need for you to speak to our children in a real and powerful way. So would it begin with us? Would we, Lord, just grow deeper and more intimate with you every day? And as we live out of that, as we model that, Lord, would our children hunger after that? Would they seek that? And would they pursue you with all of their hearts? And so, Lord, I just want to pray a special blessing and anointing over everyone who is here. I want to pray protection and covering over every person here, Lord, especially in this season. We just thank you so much for this time. Thank you for Pastor Michelle, who has facilitated this time, and the entire team. We give you all the glory. Bless the rest of this evening. In Jesus' name, amen. Amen.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Amen.
No, here I'll give it over to you, and you have a poll for something that you wanted to announce.
Yes, so here we have the feedback form. It probably just popped up on your screen, just to provide some feedback, some immediate feedback back to Explicit Movement. So you can go ahead and click off of those. This has been our largest meeting yet, and we thank you all so much for participating. If you haven't had the opportunity at this time to provide your email address and to share that out with everyone, or just with Explicit Movement, please feel free in the to privately chat me, and I'm listed as Nohea Walker with your email address, and we'll make sure to get your email address added to the Explicit Movement email bank. And so every week you'll be able to get the email reminders on the parent meeting or these parent power hours, as well as emails with additional follow-up resources. So if you have any questions, again, I'm going to put Michelle's email address in our chat. If you have any questions after today's session, please feel free to chat directly with her, complete that feedback form, and we thank you so much for coming tonight.
Yes, and let's just give our wonderful panel just a little hand and a high five.
Absolutely.
Great job. Thank you so much, all of you, for joining us.
Have a great night, everyone.
Bye. Take care.
of stuff.
Yeah, and I think too, like my observation is that it's not that people didn't want to talk about these things; they just didn't have the words to say it, right? And
Exactly.
so what you're doing is that
How?
like you guys are all modeling. Okay, here's how we start to have the conversation.
Right.
Here's like words that don't work anymore. These are ways to approach it that you just can't do that. You have to, like, what I love about how Michelle always facilitates is she always makes sure that any shame creeping in, she squashes it in a second. And because she's so good at that, I have become better at that in my home, right? And you talk about it, it's not this, because I feel like I'm probably more like your parents, Josh, like where I'm like, I mean, I grew up a long time, like in the 1900s, right? So like back in the 1900s, like everybody had a curfew. What do you mean? You know what I mean? But yeah, just because of the number of times that I've watched her and heard her squash shame, even like I'm allowed to squash shame in my mistakes.
Yeah.
And so that makes it's easier to not let that reign in my home, where I used to literally be like, yeah, we should shame them into it.
Oh,
that totally worked for me.
Yeah. And I on that shame aspect too, like even yesterday's devotional in my staff devotions, we have devotion every day. I shared my struggle with pornography, you know, and I never, amongst all the pastors there, you know, with all the staff members in there, and I thought to myself, I don't think I would have shared that if I hadn't been healed or hadn't felt the shame lifted by being around explicit and, you know, as a minister and now addressing these issues. I wouldn't have the boldness to actually come out and say it to all these really Pentecostal pastors, you know. But, you know, to me, I was like, you know, it's old news, I guess. Now I've said it so many times in so many different ways, and I've overcome that shame. And now it's like God has healed and restored my life and relationship. So a lot of tributes to Explicit and the movement.
Thank the Lord. And I want to say kudos, Karis, thank you for addressing the single parents. That was really good insight so that they don't feel, you know, like left out or, you know, so that was really good. Thank you for doing that.
Yeah, no, for sure.
And I also wanted to compliment Micah. She already left, but you know, when he was talking about, and sex, you know, like it's the most wonderful thing. I'm like, yes, like he stated it in a positive way, right? Like parents can talk about like that.
He's like, you married people know. You know what I'm talking about. I'm like, well, you're still in your honeymoon phase, but yeah, we know what you're talking about.
He was excited.
Yeah, he's very excited.
So cute.
That was funny.
Good.
Karis, I love when you were talking about Micah too. I just remember Disco Gene, the dancing machine. I was like, that guy had no problems getting dates.
No. I mean, and that's why he's like, you know, top salesman for Gravity, because he has no fear of rejection, like none. He can sell anything. And he is the only salesperson I know that will leave with stuff. Like people, they just love to give him things. Like he always says like free food, free whatever, like free manicure, free.
He's the man.
I always tell Micah, I want the Micah curse on my sons.
Oh yeah, there you go.
You know, because I sure didn't have it.
Yeah. Well, I will say this too for Josh, just because you're gonna be a daddy soon, and I think we have found that in breaking shame, it starts now. It starts when your child is gonna be a little baby, you know. And we would talk. So even to this day, like we're just very open about like, oh yeah, that does feel nice on your pee-pee, doesn't it? You know, like I think just to, you know, or even like when I started talking about body parts with Judah, when he was, you know, starting to get curious of like he'd be like, so boys have a pee-pee and girls have a non-pee-pee, you know? So I think it's talking about it and it's really using that time to say like, okay, remember, this is your property. nobody touches your property other than like if the doctor needs to, or if mommy and daddy need to help you, you know. So just always just letting that be a part of like life, you know, that you know,
I definitely, you know, that's very helpful, because I know that, like, you know, even like the things that were shunned, never to talk about, inappropriate talk, and maybe it was for other quarters, but you know, there wasn't any real like place to talk about those type of things. And I think that what I'm learning is that definitely, if they can't have it in the conversation of their home, then it's going to be very difficult. They're going to find it somewhere. So I really appreciate that small bit of advice as lifting shame. That's good.
Okay.
Well, it's been awesome. I got to head out. You guys are fam. Love you guys.
Yeah.
Nice meeting all of you guys.
Yes.
Have a great night.
Miss you guys.
See you all again.
Stay safe.
And hopefully we'll see you in the Philippines too still. So
Yes, definitely.
we train. Thank
All
you.
right, bye.
All right.
Have a good one.
We'll see you
Have
guys.
fun.